So building on directly what I've said before in those two last videos, and I know they are unpopular, if people had the will to examine themselves and understand deeply the metaphysics of it all, the deep underlying structure, they may benefit. But they take it as a personal criticism, as they are trained to do because of the jump from infantile state to a senile state, and they become senile, they become irate, they don't understand in an adult fashion what I'm getting at there, that you need to endure the difficulty, even the difficulty of what seems like a criticism against you and your type. That's adult, that's mature. To entertain the difficulty, to answer to the problem, to address it and maybe redress it, that's adult. But what I mean by jump from infantile to senile is that people go along in this overly optimistic manner. They go along, everything's going to be great, everything has to be easy. If it's difficult, that's a question mark against you. If anything is harsh, that means you may be pathological in your mind. You're the victim, but you shouldn't have been victimized in the first place. What were you thinking when you walked along that dark street and you were victimized? How dare you? You must have had something wrong up there. That's the infantile state, and they jump from that and they say they've committed to this paradigm of modernity. They are the paradigm of modernity, and you criticize it and you're criticizing them, and then they get senile. They're like Grandpa Simpson shaking his fist at a cloud. How dare that cloud look at me that way? I didn't expect rain today, or something. And they can't understand, they cannot grasp the intellectual quality of what I'm saying. It's not a criticism against you. That's a senile response. It's a critique of modernity. It's not about you. It's about modernity. I'm not criticizing Grandpa Simpson. You can shake your fist at the cloud and it's not impacting on what I'm doing, who I am, what this is all about. You're just angry that your identity seems to be coming under question. But my identity has always been under question. That's the fundamental fact of my identity, the white African identity. Get used to it. Develop a mature expectation, if you like. If you feel that endangered or that imperiled, do what I have done. Get used to it. Anticipate it. Withdraw a little bit. Form a few walls around you. It doesn't do any harm. Not in this time, not in this day and age. I am drinking a nice chicken broth soup that I made for myself with some pretty fine ingredients of some eggplant and potatoes. Excuse me while I digest it fully. What I wanted to say is I've realized of late that I'm really not, can never be a cultural Westerner, and I think, which is to say, I'm pretty sure that the paradigm that separates me from a cultural Westerner, from understanding or being a cultural Westerner, is the sense that I have that life is struggle, that life entails struggle, that life ought to entail struggle, and the cultural Westerner's point of view that life ought to be smooth sailing, life ought to be easy. But to my mind, that's deadly. That's death itself. To go from senility, to go to senility from the infantile state, that's deadly. That is death. Better to struggle, better anything, than to have that smooth sailing where you just pass from an infantile, undeveloped, unengaged, recognizing state where authority tells you something, to the senile state where you're angry at a cloud, where you're aggressive because somebody criticizes something you think it might be your identity, but you're not sure. But in any case, you don't have the mental facility or the capability or the emotional maturity to address the real issue. So you're just shaking your fist. How dare anybody come and say something against maybe my identity? It's senile. It's crazy, but I've seen it even in really respectable people, maybe mostly in respectable people, and others. So I've realized that I have a worldview that is Zimbabwean, or at least it's African in some way. Definitely, it embraces the idea of struggle and the complexity of struggle, and it's more pessimistic in that regard than optimistic. But I think ultimately it's much more optimistic because it expects that even out of struggle, or especially out of struggle, you get a really, really good result. If you don't struggle, you get an abysmal result, a very bad result. And modernity has it the opposite way around, exactly the opposite way around, whereby if you struggle within modernity or you confess to others, I have struggled, they think, oh, I've got some dirt on her, I'll use that against her at a certain point. Yay for me. I know she's struggled, and that should be a mark of credibility. There should be a sign of authenticity, of integrity, that people struggle. But it's actually viewed as the opposite. It's viewed as, oh, you must have had very vulnerable, weak aspects to yourself. Otherwise, why would there be any struggle at all? You couldn't have been completely perfect, or you would not have encountered a struggle. It's the modernity has the opposite viewpoint, and it's very, very bizarre because I can't adjust to it. And I tried and I tried, and I definitely tried, and it just didn't work out for me. It just led to confusion. It led to me being misunderstood in even more ways than I would have been misunderstood if I hadn't even tried. Because to the extent that I adapted, people thought, well, you are like us. And then, oh, no, you're not like us. What are you doing? What are you saying? What does it mean? You must be evil. You must be pathological. We will come after you, and we'll take that dirt on you, and we will use it. So it's a really bizarre reaction to things, especially when I feel that the struggle indicates portending success, and they feel that the struggle indicates a confession of pathology. It's the exact opposite. It's the totally different mentality. It's bizarre. Emotionally, it's the inverse. Western modern culture is the inverse of my worldview. And so the problem is, the more I speak in situations where there is politics involved or where it matters, I'm more likely to divulge that I think, well, struggle has a benefit. Struggle is good. And if I were to engage in school teaching and some teacher said to me, oh, this boy is really struggling, I would say, good. I might not say it like that, but I might indicate it that's great. That means he will come through with flying colors because he has engaged in a struggle. But to that teacher's mind, I'm being macho or sadistic or something else. I can't say exactly because I'm not in that Western mindset, but I think it implies something different. I'm sure it implies something absolutely the inverse and the opposite to what I'm really saying or what I'm really thinking. I'm thinking, yay for him, he'll get through that and it will make him better. And they're thinking, she likes it that he struggles. She likes him to have pain. She indulges in macho ethics. She's not really a very good person. Let's get rid of her. What dirt do we have on her? So I open my mouth and I create trouble. I open my mouth and I reveal my real values. And they are absolutely the inverse, absolutely the opposite to the contemporary Western values, absolutely so. And belatedly, and it's always too late in a way, but I have hope for my struggle. I have realized this, that I have tried to adapt to something that was the opposite to me. Of course, that's going to do me harm. Of course, that's going to lead to me being misunderstood. Of course. Uh, and weirdly enough, the more you believe, well, struggle is good and struggle leads inevitably, almost inevitably, 95% inevitably, to overcoming and to something more mature, to something better, to something stronger, to something more resilient. The more you hold to that, the more you're likely to say, yay, good, someone's struggling, yay, good, I'm struggling. And then people react as if, oh, you're like a masochist, you like to struggle, or you're so sensitive, you focus on struggle. Because to them, to their mindset, in relation to their range of existence, struggle has no purpose. And it only brings you down. It only sheds a negative light on your character. And because there's no toughness, because there's no resilience, because there's no development of character structure through struggle, which is what modernity believes and maintains. And they think, well, you're just, wavering in the wind. You're just succumbing. You're just so sensitive. So they put you in their own paradigm, and they make out that the paradigm is true. And I suppose as well as if you were brought up within the same paradigm, and that you're just focusing on the negative, which must mean you are a very negative person, which must mean you are overly sensitized to negativity, which must mean you are an overly sensitive person, which must mean you are very vulnerable to the effects of life and so on. And you are just emphasizing the negative when you are emphasizing the struggle. I have a triumphant feel about the struggle. So the whole emotional construction of it is actually the opposite in every possible detailed dimension of what I understand and what I believe. It's the precise opposite to what I understand, what I reflexively respond to, what I believe, and what I anticipate, what I expect. In the end, my worldview is much more optimistic. I say struggle produces success, struggle produces maturation, struggle produces an enrichment. And the modern view is struggle diminishes us always. It's succumbing to the forces of life. It makes us vulnerable and pathetic and weak, and we shouldn't revel in it by any means. I think there are reasons why I developed my view, and I think it has a lot to do with the African worldview of collectivism and the sense that I exist because you exist. It's a reciprocal relationship. It's very positive ideology. The very rich African environment, very organically, trees, nature, everything being somehow hardier than it is in the contemporary West in most instances, where somehow it has become fragile. Regenerative forces in Africa are more obvious. The green grass coming up through the burnt, totally destroyed, blackened area gives you hope, but you don't see that kind of thing in contemporary modernity. You don't see those new sparks of life coming through. And so I think in many, many ways, based on experience, organic experience, the sense of nature, the Westerner has a more fragile sense of human nature and reality and what can be done. And so they put up these walls and they say, no way, we can't entertain struggle because it's too dangerous. We can't entertain difficulty because it's a risk. And therefore, if you do, you are a masochist. If you do, you are someone who heightens vulnerability. If you do, then you're somebody that's susceptible and that succumbs. If you do, you're just so sensitive that you can't handle anything. And nothing is further from the truth. Well, I don't say nothing. I have been vulnerable. I have been very vulnerable, but in the end, I seem to come through it. Even now, I'm coming through it. I'm coming through that perimenopause through trial and error. I have found various herbal remedies. Let me mention thyme, Thyme. That's my latest one. That's really given me a boost. Trial and error. I believe in regenerative forces. I believe in trial and error. I believe in struggling through. And I haven't given up hope, and I didn't. And now things are gently starting to add up in my favor, bit by bit. It's back and forth, but it's progress. It's proceeding nicely. And so, I'm not passive in the face of negativity or bad situations. I keep going. I keep trying. I try something new. And I have the capacity to switch off my emotions, which is an adaptation to save energy and to save destruction. Supposing I have a really, really difficult time of it, which I have recently, that's not totally negative either. So even in that aspect, which is really quite negative to have to resort to switching off your emotions, like a pilot might switch off an engine if it's burning, if it's caught fire. Very negative in that respect, but I see this redemptive aspect, this capacity to do so, when the contemporary Westerner seems, in my experience, not to have that capacity. If they get really emotional, they can't switch that off. I can. I have that African training for hardship. I have a very deep level training for hardship. My basic difference with the cultural Westerner is that I expect hardship. I anticipate it. It's normalized. It's integrated into the quality of my being and into my philosophy. And when it comes, that's just what I had expected. I had already somehow anticipated that would be coming along, whereas they don't. They're very optimistic and very, very threatened by some sudden change, and I'm not. Doesn't mean that I have the ability to make it in the contemporary West. I'm not attuned to that at all, or adapted, but I am adapted to harder circumstances and any circumstances that may be thrown at me in any context, even the contemporary Western context. I can deal with, so long as it's something a little bit threatening, a little bit of a crisis. I will go into crisis mode, and I will deal with that very, very effectively, surprisingly so, even to myself. But what this whole video is that I am culturally Africanized, really from a very early age, and that the problem with that is I'm not culturally Westernized. The problem with that is my paradigm, my worldview, the very reflexes of every thought process or every emotion have also been Africanized. So when people mention hardship, I go, yes, hardship, yes, it's a good thing because it will bring about a good result. I'm optimistic about hardship. And I don't see it as a pathology or a strike against the individual who's experiencing it, or a confession of my vulnerabilities. I think it's just life itself, that we can't have life without hardship. Whereas the cultural moderner has the opposite faith, the opposite belief system. They think we need to have life without hardship. That's the only way they can have life. Any hardship is a strike against the individual. It's a confession of vulnerability by the individual if they have experienced hardship. There's no positive outcome from it. It's just a downward slope from there. And all the way from infantile states of mind to senility, That's what happens. That's human nature. That's what must happen. The very best we can hope for is a smooth slide downward on that trajectory.